Good morning. Good evening, good afternoon, and remember, context is everything. Media Network. Founder and CEO John Michael is reading a second textbook, cover to cover. After reading the first world history textbook from 2001, I'm reading this American history textbook from 1940. Let's get started here on Chapter 1, or Unit 1 rather, Chapter 3. The Indians. This is from 1940. The natives. Columbus, as you know, met strange people when he landed. He thought he had really reached India. That is why he called the natives Indians. Later, other European people came to the New World. They met Indians in different places in North America and South America. The Indians of one region were different from those of other regions. Yet they were all alike in some ways. The Indians who lived in what is now the United States are of most interest to us. American history textbook from 1940. They were of medium height. Their skin was the color of copper, and their eyes were dark and piercing. They had very high cheekbones. They had stiff, straight black hair. They held their bodies erect as they walked. Think Deputy Hawk from Twin Peaks. Indian divisions. The Indians were separated into many groups. These groups were called tribes. Each tribe had his own language and its own custom. Indians of one group had a language so different from that of other groups that they could not understand each other. That is why they used signs to express their thoughts to one another. Each group had its own way of making war. They had different ways of burying their dead. There were great differences in the types of houses in which Indians made. The Pueblo, the long house, the round house, and the teepee were some types of houses which Indians made. Those are pretty interesting looking. The long house, I recall from when I was a teacher in school. I remember teaching about that and thinking, well, that's interesting. The longhouse. I think that's like the Great Northwest. They did the longhouse, and it was kind of like a community building with it was like tall and round, but oval. Tall and ovular, as I recall. I might be wrong. I'm guessing. I'm kind of remembering from 4 years ago. The Pueblo. The land which is now the southwestern part of the country is hot and dry. Here lived the Pueblo Indians. They lived in homes called pueblos. The pueblo was really an Indian apartment house. Many families lived in a pueblo, like one pictured in this page. Like the one pictured in this page, ladders were even used to climb up to different stories of the pueblo. The pueblo was really a house made of clay. The clay was made into bricks. These were dried in the sun until they became very hard. These sun-dried bricks were called adobe. Premiere Pro, very expensive. Adobe. The Pueblo Indians were intelligent. They raised vegetables for food. They dug ditches to drain water into their gardens. They were wise because they knew how to bring water to the dry land. The Indians were skillful weavers. They made watertight jars. These were made from clay. The clay jars were baked in the hot sun. Long houses. Let's see if I was right about the long house. I said an ovular community building in the Great Northwest. Some Indians who lived in what is now the eastern part of the country, nope, I was wrong, made long houses. These dwellings were narrow but long. I read about that. They were built by first setting up a frame of saplings, young trees with pliable branches. This frame was then covered with bark or mud. The longhouse was often large enough to shelter 20 or 30 families. roundhouses. The roundhouse was built much like the longhouse. It was a different shape and size. A round frame was made from saplings. This was covered with bark and dry grasses or mud. Usually only one family lived in a roundhouse like the one pictured above. The teepee. The Indians who lived in the plains in the west usually lived in wigwams. A wigwam is often called a teepee. It is really a tent. The frame was made with a number of poles. Deerskin or buffalo hide was stretched over a frame. There was a hole at the top to let out the smoke. An opening at the bottom of the teepee served as a door. There was no floor covering. A number of teepees were shown in the picture on page 26. You know what the teepee looks like. A teepee was easily made and it was quickly moved. It was not much protection against heavy rain or very cold winters. Indian food. Native American food. The Indians used simple foods. Meat and fish were important foods. Much food, they repeat words all the time in this book, I'll tell you. Much food was obtained in the forest where hunting was good. Deer, rabbits, squirrels, and fowl were hunted. The Indians used bows and arrows, spears, and slings. Fish were caught in the streams and lakes. The fish were caught by spears or on hooks made of bone. The Indians who lived near the Atlantic Ocean gathered clams and oysters. These they ate with great relish. Even today, we find the remains of great piles of clam shells left from Indian feasts. Some of the Indians did not move about very much. They depended upon their gardens and cornfields more than they depended upon game or fish. They raised potatoes, corn, tomatoes, melons, pumpkins, squash, peas, and beans. Nuts and wild berries, roots, and wild rice were also used as food. They sweetened food with a maple sugar. The Indians taught the white man how to use some of these new foods. The Indian family, the Native American family. The Indian father was the head of the family. The most important thing he did was to fight. That is why the Indian man was called a brave. Atlanta Braves. He was fond of hunting. He hunted and gathered nuts and wild berries for his family. The Indian wife was called a squaw. S-Q-U-A-W. How do I spell that? How do I pronounce that? Squaw. The housework was simple. Corn was ground by women to make meal. Skins of animals were tanned and used to make clothing. An Indian baby was called a papoose. The squaw cared for the garden or farm. She had to do all the farm work with very poor tools. Indian tools. The Indians did not use iron. They made a crude hoe. A flat shell or stone was fastened to a pole. This served as a hoe. They made hatchets from flint. Flint is a hard stone. A piece of flint was tied to a short stick. A strip of deerskin was used to tie the flint to the stick. This made a good hatchet. Flint was also used for knives. The edges were skillfully sharpened by chipping the flint. The Indians and the white man. The coming of the white men brought a great change in the lives of Indians. The natives were driven from their best lands and their best hunting places. The Indians fought to defend their lands. There were many bitter wars between the Indians and the white men. The white men had firearms. White men fought in a manner that Indians did not understand. The white men won. The sad Indians moved westward. Now many Indians live on government land. Government lands where the Indians lived are called reservations. Indian children. That's all they have to say about the Indians and the white men. From 1940. This book's from 1940. 1940. Maybe it was reprinted after that. But this book, copyright 1940. I think that's interesting. I don't know about you. That's okay. But if you find it interesting as well, please subscribe. The Context is Everything Media Network, founder and CEO John Michael here, and I'm making an honest plea to you. Please subscribe if you've made it this far, because I'm going to continue to read textbooks, but I'm also doing other programming as well, which I'll link right around here, or here rather, so that you can see it, because I'm doing another show where I just talk about current events, because current events with historical context. Context is everything, right? Indian children. Indian children had few advantages, yet they knew how to enjoy life. They knew how to model animals from clay. The clay was obtained near a riverbank. Indian girls made dolls. Grass was used to make the body of the doll. Skins were made to make cloth. Boys used bones of big animals to make sleds. Boys also made stilts, and then enjoyed walking on said stilts, and made themselves taller. Indian boys made tops. Some Indian boys were able to spin the tops on ice. This requires great skill. Indian boys and girls liked to play games. They enjoyed running races. One game the Indian children liked very much was rolling a hoop. The hoop was made of blended branches from a young tree. As the hoop was rolled, a stone was thrown through the rolling hoop. This was training in speed and accuracy. That's a fun-sounding game. And that's the game. That's a fun-sounding game. And that's the end of this chapter. Very good. This book is probably for, I would guess, 10-year-olds in 1940. Context is everything. God bless. Bye-bye.